Hi everyone, this is Cyril Gruter, and today I'm going to address the question of why do people sometimes have sex with same-sex partners? Maybe I should say that some of the content of this talk is based on this book by Karl von Schaick. And first, we should distinguish between homosexual behavior and homosexuality. Homosexual behavior is the act of engaging sexually with a member of the same sex. So this is an ancient phenomenon. It's been recorded throughout human history. For example, among the ancient Greeks, mature men sometimes formed sexual relationships with adolescent males, and you can see such scenes on Greek pottery. Now, homosexual behavior is not rare among humans. In the US, for instance, about 8% of adults report having participated at least once in homosexual behavior. Homosexual behavior is also common in animals, but what seems to be unique to humans is that many individuals do not merely engage in homosexual behavior or homosexual acts, but they show a persistent and lasting preference for same-sex partners. And this is what we call homosexuality. Why this is so is not clear. Homosexuality among humans is less common than homosexual behavior. In the US, about 3% of adult men self-report as homosexuals, whereas among women, the percentage is approximately half that. And just to add a little bit more nuance, what actually constitutes homosexuality can also vary culturally. For example, in parts of Latin America and North Africa, men who adopt a penetrative role in anal sex, the tops, they are less likely to view themselves as homosexual. And most studies and information on homosexuality among humans focus on men only. The reasons for that are not entirely clear, so we focus on men in this talk. And as you know, homosexual behavior doesn't produce any reproductive benefits to the performers, so it seems to be at odds with evolutionary theory. And really, homosexual behavior and also homosexuality have puzzled evolutionary biologists for a long time. There's so many hypotheses out there that try to explain this behavior. Some say it's adaptive, but not everyone agrees with that. And there's also a genetic basis to homosexuality. Now, homosexuality is very common in the animal kingdom. There's a number of books that specifically focus. And I just want to briefly present a case study. So this is an example of my own research on mountain gorillas. And I did observe homosexual behavior among female gorillas in the Virunga volcanoes in Rwanda. So here in this picture, you can see two female gorillas rubbing their genital swellings together. We call that Gigi rubbing or frottage. So I came up with a number of hypotheses that may explain this behavior in female gorillas. So here's a list of the hypotheses. First of all, there's the reconciliation hypothesis, according to which sex resolves conflicts. Then there's the bonding hypothesis, which basically postulates that sex helps to strengthen bonds between individuals. Then there's the social status hypothesis, according to which sex is used to reaffirm the dominance hierarchy. And then there's the sexual arousal hypothesis, which basically says that homosexual behavior is more frequent at times when heterosexual activities are most common. And with the dominance hypothesis, maybe I should mention that the dominant individual is expected to be the mounter, and the subordinate individual is expected to be the mountee. And we found that there's limited evidence for the sexual arousal hypothesis, but overall, there was very little support for any of these hypotheses. So perhaps there's no adaptive function of homosexual behavior in these gorillas. Maybe this behavior is simply related to sexual gratification. So the females derive pleasure from sexual interactions with other females. Now, for humans, there's many explanations that have been put forward to explain homosexual behavior and homosexuality. I'm just going to discuss a few. For example, there's the theory of sexually antagonistic selection. According to this theory, genetic factors that contribute to homosexuality in one sex can persist in populations if they confer a selective advantage in the other sex. Some studies have explored whether the female relatives of homosexual males have more offspring than the female relatives of heterosexual males, but there was little evidence for this hypothesis. Next, there's the kin selection hypothesis. According to the kin selection hypothesis, homosexual behavior is adaptive if homosexuals invest in the reproduction of close relatives. So that's kin selection. So these people essentially forego their own reproduction and help their relatives to rear more offspring. So indirectly, they pass their genes on to the next generation. Here you can see a picture of a Fa'afafine. This is a third gender category from Samoa. These are androphilic males who display feminine characteristics and gender roles. The Fa'afafine show strong support for their nieces and nephews, actually much more than heterosexual aunts and uncles. But it's unclear if this investment actually pays off reproductively. So overall, there's limited support for the kin selection hypothesis for homosexuality. Then there's the male bonding hypothesis. So same-sex sexual activities may help to establish male bonds. Male bonds have always been extremely important in the context of things like warfare and hunting, etc. So the bonds that are forged between males can facilitate, for example, mustering the manpower to fight enemies. And then there's also male ritualized homosexual relations, for example, among the Sambia people of Papua New Guinea. Young boys traditionally left their mothers to join the man's hut when they were between 7 and 10 years old, and this is when they were initiated into homosexual activities and they were taught to perform oral sex. They also ingested the semen of older men, and by doing so, the boys were expected to grow big and strong. So overall, many questions remain unanswered about the topic of homosexual behavior and homosexuality in humans and primates and other animals. I'm sure we will continue to see major developments on this topic. Thanks for listening and see you next time.